Any fool can see that you need answers. Left hanging for the vultures on that cross. A cursed bracelet that keeps you trapped in this place. Everybody trying to kill each other.
All exiles soon discover a terrible truth. The bracelets locked around their wrists bind them to this wasteland, unable to pass the curse wall and survive. These ancient relics have been turned into tools of Tohamon, dark sorcerer of Stygia. But he did not forge them. So where did they come from? And why were they made? That story begins long ago with the first inhabitants of these lands, the Giant Kings.
In the beginning it was thus, the blackness of an utter void, with the cold winds of cosmic space blowing through it. We have not forgotten our origins, nor the immensity of the void.
The Giant Kings were one of the elder races who flourished before mankind. Their origins are mysterious, but according to their own records, they may have come from the outer dark. If so, they are not of this world, although their empire here was vast and powerful. They were worshippers of the great serpent, Set, and honored that dark god in their vast cities of dark stone, practicing terrible rituals and powerful magics.
In my mind, I still walk the streets of our city, the iron scent of blood as I pass the temple of the old serpent, the thrumming power in my veins as I chant the ritual of summoning, the intoxication and ecstasy of knowledge.
As humanity emerged and grew strong during the Thurian Age, building kingdoms such as Atlantis, Comoria, and Thule, human rulers knew and respected the power of the Giant Kings.
When the kings of lesser races come to pay us homage, they come along the river that winds through the heart of our lands. Their pleasure barges come, laden with tribute of gold and silver and sacrificial flesh, to pass between the sentinels, the gateway to our kingdom. As they pass into the shadows of the sentinels, the merriment stills, the supplicants tremble. Look upon our works, ye mighty, and despair.
Another of the elder races were the Serpent Men, the cold-blooded spawn of Set. They founded the dark realm of Valusia long before the rise of Atlantis, but were overthrown by their human slaves, who took the kingdom for themselves. Cast out, they schemed in the shadows to regain their former glory, trying again and again to secretly seize control of Valusia through magic and deception, until they met their match in King Kull. Kull was a powerful Atlantean barbarian who conquered Valusia. When he discovered the plots of the Serpent Men, he defeated them utterly, sending out his armies to hunt them to the ends of the earth and kill them all. Soon few remained. Some of the last of their kind came to the land of the Giant Kings, seeking refuge. Because of their shared worship of Set, the Giant Kings agreed and granted them sanctuary within the great volcano overlooking their capital. The age of the Giant Kings was still near its height, but in the Far East, the time of Lemuria was coming to an end. The Lemurians were an island people, worshippers of Dagon, a demon god of the deep sea. Their rulers were women, witch queens who communed with Dagon through an enchanted mask. Male royal heirs were sacrificed on the Deep One's altar. Their ships roamed the wide ocean, and their armor and weapons were meant for sailors' hands.
We were a people of the sea, voyagers and traders. Our islands were warm and prosperous, and we spent our days fishing and sailing.
It is known that a terrible cataclysm ended the Thurian age, shaking the earth and destroying many of the human kingdoms. Islands were shattered, mountains erupted from the sea, and the world was reshaped. In this great upheaval, which drowned Atlantis, Lemuria also fell.
The world shook, and our islands exploded in fire and chaos. Then, slowly, they began to sink beneath the waves. The dark water came, lapping, unstoppable, inevitable. The ocean, once our ally, now claimed all that we were with an insatiable hunger. We gathered what boats and wreckage we could, and we fled into the west.
The islands of Lemuria lay off the eastern coast of what is now Zitai. At the time, that land was ruled by the Kari Empire, a nation that the Lemurians had traded with in the past. But they did not treat the ragged Lemurian survivors kindly.
As we made landfall on their coastline, half drowned, numbed by the loss of our homes, the wicked Kari took full advantage of our plight. We were rounded up, chained, and put to work. That was the first time that our people became slaves.
For most of the Lemurians, this was the beginning of over 1,000 years of bondage, their people forced to build the purple-towered cities of the Kari. But the Witch Queen had learned powerful magics in the cult of Dagon, and she used them to free a portion of the survivors, thousands strong. This remnant of the ancient nation fled far to the west, searching for a place where they could find sanctuary and rebuild their people's glory. Eventually, after a long and dangerous journey, they discovered the land of the giant kings.
When the world was shattered, your people came to us as refugees.
When we met the ones we call the Giant Kings, some of us fell to our knees in worship. Surely these were gods in living flesh, come to offer us respite at the end of our long journey.
The ragged procession of Lemurian survivors was greeted by the triumvirate that ruled the Giant Kings, the three wisest and most powerful among them. They would decide the fate of these refugees. They were called the Archivist, the Priest King, and the Warmaker.
The Archivist concerned himself primarily with the collection of knowledge, and the Priest King had dominion over our spirits and the rituals of our faith. My people called me the Warmaker, for it was my duty to keep them safe.
The Giant Kings were willing to negotiate with the Lemurian remnants, but there was a problem. They did not share a language. Both peoples, however, had access to powerful magic. They used their sorcery and 7 enchanted artifacts to forge a solution: the Bracelets.
We could not speak their language, but our sorcerers and theirs came together and worked a powerful ritual. Enchanted gemstones enabled our communication. We forged bracelets to hold them. Thus could our communion with the Giant Kings begin.
Now able to speak to one another, the Triumvirate and the Witch Queen came to an agreement. In that time, the lands of the Giant Kings were lush and green, full of good farmland. The desert had not yet come to be, and the Giant Kings were willing to share some of it.
They had agreed that we could settle the swampy lands on their eastern borders. For them, the land had little value, but to those of us who remembered our seafaring roots, it gave us a chance to be close to the water once again. And, given time, we would be able to call upon Dagon once again.
In the coastal jungle, the Lemurians built the city of Zelha and took up their old traditions. Zelha was not far from the great capital city of the giant kings, and soon humans walked the streets of the dark stone city regularly. Merchants, craftsmen, and scholars exchanging goods and ideas. To draw the two peoples closer together, the bracelets were further empowered, adding properties of mystical travel across the land and mental translation of carved markers.
The bracelets were created to translate any language for the wearer, to allow swift movement around the Empire, and to allow communication and recording through the lore stones.
Driven by magic and enterprise, the cooperation between the giant kings and this new Lemuria enriched both kingdoms. Slowly the generations rolled on, century after century, and the ragged human remnant rebuilt itself into a thriving civilization. From a few survivors, the Lemurians became many. Indeed, they became too many for the space they had been granted.
For 1,000 years there was peace and trade among our peoples. But your kind is ever seeking, ever grasping, ever multiplying.
In the beginning, our friendship with the Giant Kings bore great fruit. We traded with them knowledge, food, baubles, and both peoples prospered. But the Giant Kings became alarmed, I suspect, at the rate at which we gave birth. Theirs was a people who took centuries to reach childbearing age, and they remained few in number, whereas we spread across our new lands and began to encroach upon theirs.
The same giant kings who had greeted the Lemurians and granted them sanctuary had now seen generation upon generation of humans live and die, always increasing in number, never pausing for the kind of slow contemplation the elder races, with their long lifespans, could afford. Tensions began to build between guest and host. Something had to be done.
In order to avoid this fate, I began sending scouting parties far to the north, outside of the borders of the Giant King's kingdom. They were to find fertile lands that would not encroach upon the territory of our hosts. Instead, we discovered something dark.
Among the mountains of the north, in the underground passages beneath the volcano, the Lemurian scouts discovered the refuge of the serpent men of Velusia, former oppressors of humanity. In the eyes of the Witch Queen, this was the ultimate betrayal. The Giant Kings had been secretly sheltering a race dedicated to enslaving or exterminating her people.
We confronted the Giant Kings and the Triumvirate with their darkest secret, and they did not deny it. How could we trust them, allied as they were with the ancient enemies of mankind? I gave them an ultimatum: to give us the northern lands, to stay their hand while we exterminated the Serpent Men. They refused.
In the eyes of the Giant Kings, the humans were the betrayers. They had been welcomed as guests, given land and freedom, and now demanded that their hosts stand aside as they committed genocide against allies under their protection, fellow worshippers of Set. They would not budge. Instead, they sought to bring the Lemurians to heel. Until then, the magical field surrounding their lands had served only as a power source. But the Giant Kings had secretly tied it to the bracelets, in case their human guests ever turned against them.
Understand the wall was built to power the bracelets, to give sorcerers power when far from home. But your betrayal forced our hand.
The Giant Kings had included a death weave in the sorcery. Any who tried to flee their control were simply killed by the curse wall.
And so the bracelets, once tools of peace, became shackles. Determined to restore their control over their lands and protect their allies, the giant kings began to enslave the humans now trapped within the curse wall. The Lemurians immediately gathered armies and marched against their oppressors, equally determined to never again be slaves.
Was it fated that our two peoples would go to war? I like to think, Bonded One, that we are wiser than that. But humankind, it seems, cannot avoid conflict, and my people do not like change.
Meanwhile, deep beneath the volcano, the last of the serpent men smiled darkly. To ignite the fires of hatred and create bloody ruin had been their plan all along. Slowly dying out, consumed with bitterness and loathing, they wanted only to drag everyone else down with them.